After more than a year of uncertainty, lockdowns, quarantines, and social distancing, everybody's ready for life to go back to the way it was. We're ready for work to get back to normal, for school to get back to normal, for our families, our churches, and our lives to get back to normal. But what does normal even mean? How do we navigate a world that's forever changed and ever changing? What does it look like to live out an ancient faith in a world obsessed with new and better? How do we stay faithful to the ways and words of Jesus in a world that doesn't seem all that interested in either? How can we go back? More importantly, are we sure we want to? We're all ready for normal. But why go back to normal when normal isn't working?
So one of the things that you'll get to know about me as we spend more time together is that I have a deep, abiding love for all things Star Wars. Right? Not necessarily a big sci-fi guy overall. Like some people just like that's their jam. I never really thought of myself that way, but as far back as I can remember, the story and the characters of Star Wars captured my attention, and I never looked back. And my personal favorite of the whole bunch is the movie The Empire Strikes Back, because it is definitively the best one. That's just how it is. And part of what makes it the best, and part of what makes it the best sequel of all time, kind of tied for first with Godfather Part 2, is the big reveal at the end of the movie. Right? At the end of the movie, there's this iconic scene where the hero, Luke Skywalker, is battling with the evil Darth Vader, and Vader utters the infamous words, "I am your father." Right? Okay? And so it was a huge moment of a reveal in the movie, and everybody in the audience was just shocked. Remarkably, according to the lore attached to the movie, everybody on set was shocked too, because Lucas so wanted to keep it a secret that he only told 3 people. Himself, the movie's director, and Mark Hamill, who played Luke Skywalker, and he only told him moments before the scene was shot. You see, because of the magic of the movies, there was one person playing Vader on set, and then they dubbed in James Earl Jones' iconic voice doing the lines. And so on set, as they're practicing and rehearsing and getting ready to shoot the film, the line was, "Obi-Wan didn't tell you the truth, Obi-Wan killed your father." And then the movie comes out, and everybody who worked on the movie is like, "What?" And so it was this huge reveal, but it also created a bit of a plot hole. You see, in the original film, when Luke first meets Obi-Wan, his trusted advisor, Obi-Wan tells him that Darth Vader killed his father. And so now we have to wrestle with what's really true. And it created enough of a plot hole that they decided they needed to address this in the third film. And so in Return of the Jedi, some of y'all are, if you're not with me, all right? Just endure and hang with me. Mentor Obi-Wan from beyond the grave, he asks the $1 million question. He's like, whoa, wait a minute. Why did you lie to me? Why did you tell me Darth Vader killed my father? And Obi-Wan replies this convoluted explanation that, well, the man who was your father, Anakin Skywalker, became Darth Vader, and the evil in Darth Vader killed the good man that was Anakin Skywalker. And then Obi-Wan says, so what I told you was true from a certain point of view. Okay, so technically, I guess he can make the case. But that doesn't really quite feel like what we would say genuine truth looks like. I mean, technically it wasn't a lie from a certain point of view. But was it true? Fast forward to today, and we live in a world that is content with truth from a certain point of view. In fact, we are so convinced that truth is a matter of perspective that you can have truth and I can have truth, and we'll even find ways to market your truth to you. We will create entire cable channels just dedicated to promoting the truth you already believe. And indoctrinating us. I think that's the only word that's fitting. Just indoctrinating us, discipling us, that the only voice we can trust is the one we already agree with, the one we already believe, the one that speaks to us from a certain point of view, a point of view that we're most comfortable with. I know, okay, everybody, sigh, take a breath. Okay, we're not going there, at least not directly. All right, so let the air out of the balloon a little bit. But it is a symptom of a culture that says truth is really only a matter of a certain point of view. We've moved past the rationalism that led to what we would call the rise of the modern world with the Industrial Revolution and facts being grounded in something firm, and if you can prove it, then it's true. We've shifted past that culturally into this new kind of, I don't know, worldview is probably the best word. I'm kind of fumbling there, but it's not necessarily even new, but it's this thing that we refer to kind of offhand as postmodernism, where truth is essentially relative. You can have your truth and I can have my truth. It's all comes down to what truth is based on your experience. And when you look at the world and you understand that we're in a culture that embraces truth from a certain point of view, it becomes really clear why it seems there's so much division and angst. Because we've moved past a place as a culture where people are trying to decide what the best thing to do is. They're trying to decide what's true. And when we have differences of opinion, difference of belief on what we need to do, that's one thing. But when we have differences of opinion on what is actually true, that's a problem of a different sort. And the pursuit of truth without any kind of objective measure is the new normal. And so in this season where we just keep feeling like, man, I just wish life would get back to normal, we find once more that before we decide to go back to normal, we need to decide if normal was working. The relativization of truth, your truth, my truth, all of that stuff, that's not a thing we've stumbled into in the last year or two. It has very little to do with the global crises that we've found ourselves in, that we're ready to get past and get back to normal from. It was already normal before all of that. And so before we decide to go back to normal and the way things were, we need to decide if normal is working. And we live in this world where embracing this dynamic of my truth and your truth, and they can both be equal, that's normal. don't know if you've noticed, normal isn't working. Now, I need to give you one of these disclaimers because a whole lot of ink, and I mean a whole lot of ink, has been spilled in the Christian publishing world in the last 10 to 15 years about the inherent evils of postmodernism and this cultural shift that has been taking place for almost a generation now. A lot of the ink that has been spilled in books and blogs and articles consequently was written by people who are writing from a modernist perspective, which is ironic given that when modernism arose, the church was on the forefront of decrying it as an evil change in culture, something that should be resisted and fought against. And so perhaps we need to pause for a moment and set the table the right way for understanding how do we attack a normal that says truth is this ever-shifting thing that we can't really pin down. What we have to understand is these cultural categories we're talking about, modern, postmodern, all these things, they're categories. They are descriptors for how the wider culture views the world. Okay? There are going to be elements in any worldview outside of a purely biblical worldview that is in step and in line with the things of God. Any worldview is going to have positive and negative elements, good things, bad things in it. And so our job as the people of God is not simply to pick one of these cultural frameworks and defend it against all the others. Our job as the people of God is to understand the culture in which we live, because that is the culture that God has called us to reach with the good news of the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so often in our wrestling with the cultural worldview questions, we often try to argue from a position that isn't informed by what the culture at large is actually willing to believe. Now, we're not talking about questions of truth and whether they're willing to believe that, whether we're willing to believe that. But if we're trying to prove truth in a rationalistic, modernistic way to a postmodern world, they're going to say, yeah, okay, sure. You can believe that's true if you want. Because truth is only true from a certain point of view. And so the challenge we're faced with is understanding the culture in which we live, understanding what makes people tick, the categories that people think in that they don't even know they're thinking in, so that we can best be prepared, as the New Testament tells us, to give an answer to anyone who asks of the hope that is within us. So we have to understand what it means to live in a world where truth is a matter of perspective. Truth comes from a point of view. And as the people of God committed to the ways and words of Jesus, we have the opportunity to stand out and to embrace truth distinct from the way the world normally works. We have an opportunity as the people of God to put on display an understanding of what it means for something to be true that is not subject to the changing whims of culture. We have an opportunity to embrace what it means for something to be true regardless of your certain point of view. What that means is at times we have to critique the parts of culture that aren't true. We have to challenge the things that don't align with God's character. And then, this is where it gets tricky, we have to actually live that out. Right? Like that's where it really gets hard. Because, again, if culture is a worldview, and in the last series when we talked about toxicity, I described culture as kind of the water we swim in, right? So we're always swimming in this world that says truth is relative. It's only a matter of time before some of that becomes a natural lens through which we see the world. And so we have to not only critique that tendency in the world around us, we also have to critique it within ourselves. And then we have to live out what it means to say, no, truth is something that's knowable, and truth is something that is worth defining and defending. Because everyone that we encounter is used to having to filter out what's said. Everyone you meet is used to having to hear what you're saying, listen to what you mean, and then decide if they think it's true. Because we're used to having to do that. We know that some of what is said is only part of what is meant. And so we're used to having to filter things. It's normal. Normal isn't working. And I believe as the people of God, we have an opportunity by living differently, where we speak in a way that conveys, no, this is what I mean. You don't have to filter it. You don't have to look for subtext. You just have to hear what I'm saying and understand it as best you can and ask questions where you need. Like, if we'll live in such a way that people don't have to filter what we say for what our agenda is, we can be distinctive from the world around us. Because everybody is used to filtering what's said, picking out truth from a certain point of view. I would put it like this. It's there in the teaching notes if you're following along in the YouVersion app. Everything on the screen will be there for you. You can fill in the blanks. But I would put it like this for us. Bending truth to match an agenda is normal. But if normal isn't working, normalize integrity without compromise. Okay? In a world where truth is a matter of a certain point of view, bending truth to fit an agenda is normal. It's what we expect. That's why we feel like when we have conversations with people, especially people we think we disagree about, we're constantly filtering, yeah, but what are they really saying? What are they really meaning? Because we're expecting that if they're presenting facts in a way that are bent to their agenda. Right? That's why we have all of these channels that will tell you what you already believe is true no matter what. Right? Because it's a matter of which way are we going to take the facts and spin them. So bending truth to match an agenda is normal. But if normal isn't working, perhaps as the people of God, we need to normalize integrity without compromise. And that sounds like an easy thing, right? It sounds like something we're like, well, yeah, of course, right? Like, if you love Jesus, you should tell the truth. Like, we shouldn't have to talk about that. We shouldn't have to ponder, is that something we can agree with, or is that something we should strive to do as the people of God? But in a culture where truth is a matter of a certain point of view, it's good every once in a while to be reminded, hey, let's check the filters we have. Let's check the lenses we're looking at the world through so that we become a people committed to integrity without compromise. And I think there's a moment in the life of the early church here in the book of Acts that points us in that direction. It's a moment in the life of the early church where their unity was rocked to its core, and God's hand of blessing was suddenly removed in a moment. And at the heart of the story is a question about truth. And more specifically, at the heart of the story is a question about truth from a certain point of view. Let's jump back into the book of Acts, step into the story of the early church, Acts chapter 5. If you want to follow along in a Bible, click on a device, jump into YouVersion, follow along on the screen, Acts chapter 5. Luke writes this for us, starting in verse 1. Now a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. And with his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself. But he brought the rest and put it at the apostles' feet. Then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself some of the money you received for the land. Didn't it belong to you before it was sold? And after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? What made you think of doing such a thing? You have not lied to men, but to God." When Ananias heard this, he fell down and died. And great fear seized all who heard what had happened. Like, we pause for a moment. This is one of those moments that you're just like, well, yeah. Dude comes to church with an offering. Peter's like, "Is this everything?" He's like, "Yeah." And when Peter says, "I'm pretty sure it's not," dude falls down and dies. And Luke says, "Oh yeah, and great fear seized everyone who heard what happened." Thanks, Luke, for cluing us in. Could have probably picked that up, but thankful that it's there, that they are human just like we are. Verse 6, "Then young men came forward, wrapped up his body, and carried him out and buried him. About 3 hours later, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter asked her, 'Tell me, is this the price you and Ananias got for the land?' 'Yes,' she said, 'that is the price.' Peter said to her, 'How could you agree to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of the men who buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out also.' At that moment, she fell down at his feet and died. Then the young men came in, and finding her dead, carried her out and buried her beside her husband. And once again, great fear seized the whole church and all who heard about these events." One thing I love about the heart of the story of Scripture is it presents to us real people in real circumstances who respond like real people, who are fleshed out as characters that we can understand and relate to a bit. Because oftentimes in stories, the heroes seem larger than life. They seem beyond any sort of reproach. But Acts, like the whole of Scripture, is pretty honest and fair about the missteps of the people of God as much as it is about the times that they got it right. And so Luke, who up to this point has been telling a story of unchecked unity and generosity, takes us down a different road in the life of the early church, right? Because so far, if we've been tracking through the early chapters of Acts, it sounds like utopia, right? Like everybody's sharing everything. Oh, you need something? Hey, I'm going to go sell my extra rental house and I'm just going to give the money to the church so that you have what you need. And it's like there's this perfect picture of unity. They're worshiping together house to house. There's no needy people among them. There's cats and dogs living together. It's like the best of all worlds. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we're introduced to Ananias and Sapphira. Which seems like a story that if Luke wants to picture the church as this idealized community, he could have just skipped, right? Like, everybody who was there clearly got the message because great fear seized the church and everyone heard it. Like, he could have just skipped over that part. But he doesn't. He presents to us a picture of the church that reveals its flaws and its missteps and everything. And so this very idyllic picture is suddenly shattered. Now we have to remember, we're on the heels of Luke telling us that from time to time, when someone was needy, someone would take their property and sell it and bring the proceeds from the sale and set it at the feet of the apostles. We're coming immediately on the heels of an actual example of that. The guy named Joseph that we saw at the end of our time together last week, that Joseph, a Levite, sells his property and is dubbed Barnabas, the son of encouragement, by the apostles. So it's on the heels of that sort of story, this incredible story of generosity, that we meet Ananias and Sapphira. And so because of the way that the story kind of unfolds, it's easy for us to assume that this story is a story about money. Right? It's easy for us to read the story of Ananias and Sapphira and go, oh, they were greedy. That was their problem. They should have given more. They should have done what Barnabas and everybody else was doing and given it all. But if we really read the text closely, I don't think that's the point. This isn't a story about money. There is money in this story. But the money issue, the generosity issue that we talked about last week, is really just the backdrop against which the story of Ananias and Sapphira unfolds. It's the backdrop for a bigger issue, the issue of character and integrity. We saw last week that Luke tells us it was the common practice among the church, that from time to time those who had lands or properties would sell them and give the money to the apostles for the benefit and the care of the poor among them. But we were also clear to point out that Luke tells us it wasn't a requirement or an expectation. It was something that was normally happening, but it wasn't something that was required of anyone. And so we're told that Ananias, like others, sold some property. And Luke's careful to point out that with his wife's full understanding, he kept back part of the proceeds for himself. And so when he comes in and is confronted by Peter, Peter doesn't confront him about the money. I mean, he does, but that's kind of the doorway into the actual conversation, right? Peter asks him about it. But what ultimately he calls Ananias out for is misrepresenting the gift as if it were the whole amount. He says, Ananias, did you get this much money for your property? Now, let's think about this through the cultural lens that we all kind of share, that we maybe wish we didn't, sometimes aren't aware that we have. We can perhaps project a little bit and try to imagine his inner monologue, because I can see this inner monologue happening sometimes for myself. Can I be that honest? I see this inner monologue happening in our culture. Something goes like this. Peter says, so did you get $10,000 for that property? And Ananias in his mind goes, well, technically we got $15,000, but we did get $10,000 for it. Right? I mean, if you got $15,000 for it, you got $10,000. Now, did you get 20? No. But if you got $15,000 for it, you got $10,000 for it. You also got $9,000, $8,000. You get right, like whatever the amount is. And so you can kind of imagine this inner monologue going, that's we got that much for the land. Because technically, it's not a lie. But Peter seems to react differently. Right? Ananias is describing this as truth from a certain point of view. I mean, well, if you look at it this way, I did get 15, but that means I got 10. Now I got more than 10, but I got 10. And Peter says, look, man, this isn't about the money. The property was yours, right? And once you sold it, the money was yours. You could do with it what you wanted. But what does Peter ask him? Why has Satan so filled your heart that you would lie to the Holy Spirit? Just let that sink in for a minute. Because it sounds like what Peter is saying is that our technically truth, from a certain point of view, is known to be dishonest to the Holy Spirit of God. Peter says this isn't about the money. It's not a matter of that you should have given more or even that you should have given it all. That wasn't the expectation. The issue here is one of character and integrity. The issue here is one of truth. Last week we touched on something that shows us that from time to time Luke is working to to help us make the connection that the life of the early church, as he's describing it in the book of Acts, it kind of echoes the ideals that were laid out in the Old Testament law, particularly in the book of Deuteronomy. And so I think at minimum that Luke has some things from Deuteronomy echoing in his mind, and therefore in his pen, as he's telling this story of Ananias and Sapphira. Listen to what we read in Deuteronomy chapter 23. Starting verse 21, it says, "If you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to pay it, for the Lord your God will certainly demand it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from making a vow, you will not be guilty. Whatever your lips utter, you must be sure to do, because you made your vow freely to the Lord your God with your own mouth." It sounds like what Peter is looking at Ananias and saying, dude, have you read Deuteronomy? Just don't make the vow. Just bring the offering. And don't try to pass it off as if it's the whole amount. If you just done freely with what God had given you, we don't have an issue. Deuteronomy seems to say, don't lie to God. Which, right, it's another one of those kind of moments, right? Like, that shouldn't be something that's hard for us to go, yeah, I think that's probably a baseline expectation. If you're going to follow Jesus, don't lie to God. We just probably add that to the list. Like, that's just one of those things that shouldn't surprise us. It's why Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, let your yes be yes. And then you don't have to worry about swearing by anything else. Right? Sometimes we hear that and we're like, Jesus said don't swear by anything, and then we make it about cussing or something. He's like, no, don't swear by the temple. Don't swear by God's throne in heaven. Just tell the truth and you don't have to worry about it. Think back to the playground when you were kids and you tell somebody something and they go, and you go, I swear. What are you saying? Trust this more because I'm invoking some unnamed authority greater than myself. Not sure what's going on. Explosions going on. Anyway, so Jesus just says, let your yes be yes. Remember what Deuteronomy said? If you tell God you're going to do something, just do it. Which, again, means Ananias' story, it's not about money. It's about integrity. It's about truth. It's about honesty. It's about yes being yes. Blowing stuff up down there today. I don't know. It's all right. It's all right. I've completely lost my thought. We'll dial it back in here. All right. So, there we go. All right. So when we think about Ananias' story in a world in which we live, a world where truth is from a certain point of view, a world where it is normal for people to bend truth to an agenda, and for everyone, you and I included, to assume that if somebody's talking about truth, they're only talking about truth in a way that bends it to their agenda, that shapes the facts to what they want it to say. Right? We're used to having to filter that. It's the world in which we live. And what I think Ananias' story challenges us with is this, that as the people of God, our commitment to truth must outweigh our pursuit of personal gain. As the people of God, our commitment to the truth must outweigh our pursuit of personal gain. Because that's Ananias' issue, right? He sees the opportunity here to get a little bit of candy, to get a little love. He wants the praise that comes with great sacrifice without actually making the sacrifice. He's sitting back and he's like, man, Joseph got a snazzy new nickname, Barnabas, son of encouragement. Man, I got to get in on this, right? He wants the accolade that comes with his generosity. He's just like, I just don't know if I want to be quite that generous. And so maybe, technically, from a certain point of view, I can get both. And the response of God is swift, which we should expect based on what Deuteronomy 23 says, right? If you make a vow to the Lord and don't keep it, He will judge you. You are guilty of sin, right? We would expect something to happen. The response of God for Ananias is quick. Because he wanted the glory that comes with sacrifice without actually having to make the sacrifice, with being able to live in this contented place of in-between truth and falsehood. And I think in a world that's used to bending truth to fit an agenda, that temptation is alive and well for you and I. Let's not pretend it's not. Well, technically. No. Is it true? Is it honest? Not technically true. You've heard me say this before. If you have to go, well, technically, you're probably in dangerous ground. You're probably flirting with sin, if not embracing it. Because sin lives in that gray area between truth and dishonesty. It says, well, if you just look at it right, it's kind of true. It's not true. Right? If you have to describe something as not true, that's not the same as calling it truth. And that's where Ananias is standing in this moment. And his wife comes in. And we already know. She knows the deal. She knows what's going on. Peter asked her the same question. Hey, Ananias was just here. He gave us this money. Is that what you guys got for the land? Yeah. We got that much. And did you catch? I don't think there's a big theological point here, but this kind of stuff nerds me out because it's just fun to see the artistry of the biblical writers. Did you catch what Luke said? Immediately, she fell down at his feet. The very place people were bringing their offerings and their gifts and placing them at the feet of the apostles for the use of the poor becomes her very last place. The men come in and carry her out just as they had her husband. Because their commitment to truth didn't outweigh their pursuit of personal gain. Now we're tempted, I think, with a story like this to go, well, yeah, I get it. But I'm an honest person, and I try to do my best to have integrity. There's always going to be some bad apples around. But there's another Old Testament echo in this story that I think makes it pertinent for us to make sure we get our minds around why this matters so deeply for us as the people of God. For why it is that we can't get okay with this gray area between truth and dishonesty. An echo that makes it clear that as the people of God, our integrity is only as good as my integrity and only as good as your integrity. The echo comes to us based on a term that Luke uses here. When he describes Ananias' action as keeping back part of the money, he uses a very particular and very oddball kind of word. It only shows up twice here in Acts and one other time in the whole of the New Testament. That's in Paul's letter to Titus, where he uses it to describe the action of a slave stealing from his master as a poor representation of the gospel. Okay, so this isn't a positive word. It's not a word that has good connotation to it. This is where we get just really nerdy for a second, nerdier than Star Wars, okay? So bear with me for a minute. Before the New Testament era, In the time between the Old and New Testaments, the Old Testament text was translated into Greek because the Hebrew of the Old Testament was just a religious language at that point, like Old Latin in the Catholic Church. Nobody spoke it anymore. It was only used liturgically in worship. And so as synagogues spread across the Greek world, more and more people were comfortable using the vernacular Greek that they were speaking every day in church. Okay, so they began using this Greek translation of the Old Testament. In time, it became the Old Testament of choice for Christians who are now going into the Gentile world. They have no connection to the synagogue. Those folks have probably never even heard Hebrew read, much less spoken. And so it just made sense that this translation becomes kind of the Bible for the early church. Okay? It's with that kind of backdrop in mind that we get this other echo, because that translation of the Old Testament uses this same word one time, just once. And I told you it's an oddball kind of word. It doesn't show up very often anywhere. The only place it shows up in the Old Testament is in a story in Joshua chapter 7. We're not going to turn there and read it for time's sake. It's a lengthy story. I'm going to recap it for you, but I would encourage you, go back and read the story in Joshua chapter 7. It's the story of a man named Achan. It's during the conquest, when God is sending his people in to conquer the promised land. And they'd gone out to battle and they'd been victorious. The Lord was with them. And then they get ready to conquer the next city after they cross over into the promised land. And God tells them, I want you to destroy everything. Devote it all to me. It's a sacrifice to the Lord your God. And so they go up to battle, and Achan is among the guys that goes up to battle. And as they are victorious and they see the plunder, Achan sees some pretty sweet stuff. And so he takes some. And Joshua 7 says he kept it back for himself. And he hides it in his tent, which is the clearest sign he knows this is out of bounds, right? So he takes some gold, and he takes some fancy new robes, which kind of doesn't make sense, right? Because they've been in the desert for 40 years. When's he going to wear this, right? Like, he comes out sporting this fancy new coat, and everybody's like, hey, bro, where'd that come from? There's not a lot of shops in the wilderness, right? And so it's going to be really clear. Did you get that from AI? Because we're supposed to destroy everything, right? Maybe that's why he buried it in his tent, as he realized after the fact, like, man, what am I going to do with this? I'll just save it for later. So he buries it in his tent. And they go out to the next city for conquest, and they're decimated. Joshua inquires of the Lord, and he says, why were we able to prevail here but not here? Why would the Lord not fight for us? And the Lord makes it clear there's sin in the camp. And he lays out a process to determine who the guilty party is, and ultimately it's revealed that Achan is the man who acted unjustly towards the things that were devoted to the Lord, and he kept back part of them for himself. And Achan and his household are put to death. Now, linguistics aside, we don't need a biblical studies degree to figure out that there's some parallel in these two stories. When the collective people of God are experiencing the blessing, the favor of God, everything they do is just dripping with God's favor, and all of the sudden that comes to a screeching halt because there was sin in the camp. Ananias and Sapphira are struck dead. They fall at Peter's feet. Because when the integrity of God's people doesn't match the character of God's holiness, we can expect his judgment rather than his blessing. As the people of God, When our integrity doesn't match the holiness of God's character, we can expect his judgment rather than his blessing. In that kind of summary statement that we kind of chuckled at earlier, great fear seized them all. This is also the very first time in the book of Acts that Luke uses the word church to refer to the followers of Jesus. And one more time, it's a word that he's borrowing, an echo from the Old Testament, because in that Greek translation of the Old Testament, that's the word that was referred to Israel as the assembled people of God. Luke wants it to be clear to this first generation of the followers of Jesus, if we're taking up the mantle and we're going to be the people of God, his holiness has not changed. And as the people of God, our integrity has to match the character and the holiness of God. If we're going to be his people, we have to reflect his character. Invite the band to come back. We're in the midst of this cultural moment where truth is flexible. It's bendable. It's easy to shape it and fit it to your agenda by just going, well, I mean, technically, from a certain point of view, what I said was true. It wasn't not true. It wasn't technically a lie. That's normal. But if truth is measured by God's character, it doesn't matter how noble our aims or how minor our lie. When we make truth a matter of technicality, we are buying into a normal that isn't working. When the people of God in our private dealings or in our shared life compromise truth, we should expect the removal of God's blessing. It's normal to try to bend truth to fit an agenda, to try to cover over that little glimmer of selfishness or self-interest. But if normal isn't working, as the people of God, we must normalize integrity beyond compromise, no matter the consequence. Let's pray together.